everybody, how's it going? So continuing on with our fishing float series while we wait for the weather to warm up, which should be hopefully by next week. Might not be getting out there, but yes, the decent temperatures set in starting next week. But today I'm going to talk to you about this little guy here. This is a spring float. Now, it's not the most popular method of float fishing, and for very good reason, um, because they have a tendency to cause a lot of damage to your fishing line. So you've got to be very careful with them. Spring float gets its name obviously because of the springs that are used to hold the float or attach the float to your fishing line. I'm going to show you how you do that. Just put this down so it doesn't roll off onto the floor. I get some fishing line here. Well, using the pink so you can see. Now you see here we've got a spring. Um, sorry, a spring on the end here. This float is affixed perpendicular to the fishing line, so it sticks out. Fishing line, float. All right, so you're going to take your thumb and you're going to pull down, and you'll see that there's like a hook device at the end of the float, and that is where you're going to hook your fishing line onto, like that. All right, so the float sits in the water like this, and the fishing line, your line goes the line back to your reel, and then of course the line with your tag in with your terminal tackle on, and it just sits in the water and does that. So it is a very, very convenient float to use because as conditions change, if you're doing a lot of fishing throughout the day and you no longer want to float fish, you just simply uh, take the float, pull the spring down, and simply pull the line off of it, and you can go about, bottom fishing or cast and retrieve, whatever you want to do. So it makes it very convenient to change your rig out as the conditions of fishing change. And if you're like me and you fish for a number of hours in any day that you do go out, you want to be able to change your rigs fairly quickly instead of messing around cutting and tying and re-splicing or whatever. So that's why I happen to like using them. But the downfall is that does damage your fishing line. Now, we all know monofilament dries out. You know that, right? It becomes brittle after one. That's why you should change out your fishing line on your reel if you're using monofilament on a fairly regular basis. So to avoid crack-offs and splits and whatever. Because if you're using this type of float, if your line is a little bit dry or brittle, this will cut through that line. The pressure between the spring and the plastic here, excuse me, will split your line. And I've cracked off right up at the spring here on a number of occasions simply because I've let my line dry out a bit too. I've used it a bit too much, and I've forgotten to change it out. So that is one of the biggest downfalls of that float, is it does damage the line. So you just have to be careful to make sure you're using fresh line, and just be careful how you adjust it. You can adjust the float by pulling up and down the line. Just make sure your line is wet to reduce any friction. Try not to snag it, but it is a good way to fish. There's no two ways about it. It's just as like any other float. Um, because it sits perpendicular on the line, casting, you just have to be careful that when you throw the line out, when they sit like this on the line, fishing line here, and there's the float, they can spin around and catch the line and tangle. They're more apt to do that than they are an inline float. So that's another reason you have to be careful when you're using them. They tangle, just like your waggler float will if you don't uh, mind how hard you cast out the line. So before I've told you, you don't have to whale it out there. Let the rod action do the work for you. Okay. So that is a spring float. Come in all shapes and sizes. We've got the thin one here. We've got the more buoyant one. We've got the little tiny one here for light rigs. Um, they work just like any other float. You shot them up the same way you would a waggler float or a slip bobber. There's the equator, that white line there. You want the water, you want it kind of sitting around that area so that you can see the float. That's why the top of the float has the fluorescent color so you can see it. And it will bob up and down just like a waggler float will. Okay. So that's why it's important to get it balanced properly, simply because if you have it too high up, you're going to get false readings every time there's a wave or somebody sneezes. All right, so that is your spring float. It is a good way of fishing. There's nothing wrong with it. But like I say, it does cause damage to the fishing line. So you just have to be very wary of that you can nick the line and you can end up cracking off in a cast. Or if you get it tugged, it can sever the line there around the spring too. So, but there is nothing wrong with using this type of float. I enjoy using it because it's just so convenient. If I want to switch my method of fishing, I just take the float the off the line, and I can do bottom fishing or cast and retrieve. Okay, so I'll leave it up to you as to whether or not you want to use a spring float. All right, so this is Sharon for Fishing Tales and Other Lies. Until the next time, I'm going to say tight lines and bye for now.